You have walked through stores and markets, dazzled by the sparkle, the shimmer, the promise of beauty that rests on your finger, your wrist, your neck. Jewelry is meant to adorn, to celebrate, to honor, but not all that glitters serves the light. Some pieces carry more than aesthetic value. They carry intention, symbolism, a weight you cannot see. The untrained eye calls it art, fashion, or charm. The discerning soul calls it a reminder. Everything in this world is infused with energy. Every object has a spirit, and some spirits are not your own. Christians, the call is clear. What you wear does not simply reflect your taste. It echoes your allegiance. The first truth is subtle but profound. Not all jewelry is neutral. Some pieces, intentionally or not, bear marks of power designed to influence, to attract, to manipulate. Symbols engraved, charms embedded, stones sourced from places steeped in occult practice. They are not inert. They speak in silence, communicate in frequency. And the moment you place such an object upon yourself, you allow it to converse with your soul. The conversation is not always audible, but it is unmistakable to the heart attuned to God. This is the spiritual reality behind adornment. Even beauty can carry bondage. The first category to beware is jewelry that bears unseen inscriptions. The letters, runes, or characters etched into metal or stone may appear decorative, but they often carry intent far older than your fashion choice. They are written for invocation, for channeling, for power that is not from God. A ring, a pendant, a bracelet may whisper promises of luck, protection, or influence, but those whispers are from a source that seeks to distract, dominate, and distance you from divine authority. What seems harmless adornment may, in reality, be a tether to forces you do not control. Next is jewelry that incorporates stones with histories of occult use. Crystals, amulets, and gems are frequently advertised as healing, grounding, or energizing. Yet, many have been used for centuries in rituals designed to summon spirits, bind intention, or alter consciousness. Wearing them without discernment is not merely naive, it is participation. The spirit of discernment is more powerful than the glamour of the gem. The light of Christ is not enhanced by a stone whose history is shadowed. Every time you touch, wear, or display it, your attention, your energy, your soul is exposed to influence, subtle but real. The third hazard is charms and pendants shaped into occult symbolism. Pentagrams, triquetras, serpents, dragons, mystical eyes, inverted signs. They are not decoration. They are language. They speak to forces beyond the visible. They invite interaction where it was never intended. The wearer may not consciously acknowledge it, but symbols carry power precisely because they bypass reasoning, appealing directly to the subconscious. A piece may be small, beautiful, subtle, but the spiritual imprint remains. Christians must remember that beauty is never a shield against influence. Appearance does not determine allegiance. Choice does. Fourth, jewelry designed for protection or luck through magical intent carries hidden risk. Many necklaces, rings, or bracelets promise fortune, love, or safety through charms, rituals, or enchantments. The problem is not the hope, it is the source. To rely upon an object for protection or favor is to invert trust. God's providence does not operate through gold, silver, or stone. It operates through obedience, faith, and righteousness. Every amulet that claims power in itself draws attention away from the only true source of strength. Christians must guard their hearts against substitutes for divine assurance. Finally, the most insidious is jewelry tied to ancestral or generational occult practice. Sometimes objects are inherited, passed down without knowledge of their origin. A family ring, a brooch, a necklace may carry energetic memory of practices, oaths, or rituals performed by those who came before. The wearer may believe they are honoring heritage, tradition, or memory, yet unknowingly they step into a continuity of intention foreign to Christ. Faith, demands discernment. Love demands wisdom. The history of an object matters as much as the present beauty. Ignorance does not nullify influence. Attention does. The consequence of wearing such jewelry is subtle yet profound. Your faith, your connection to God, your spiritual clarity can be quietly eroded. The distance is not immediate, but incremental, measured in moments of distraction, desensitization, and normalized exposure. Each glance in a mirror, each reflection of light from the metal, each weight on the body becomes a reminder, a whisper, a vibration. The enemy does not always shout. He hums, and the hum is enough to shift your perception, alter your alignment, and weaken vigilance. But there is hope, and the hope is active. Awareness restores authority. Discernment fortifies freedom. Removing such objects is not superstition, it is obedience. Choosing adornment that honors God, that carries no shadowed history, that celebrates creation without compromise, is an act of worship. Jewelry can be beautiful without binding, ornate without opening doors to darkness, a reflection of divine creativity rather than occult intention. When the choice is made deliberately, the soul is protected, the faith strengthened, and the presence of God honored. The lesson is not to fear adornment, but to respect it. Every object you allow to touch your skin, every item displayed on your body, communicates something to your spirit. When faith is the priority, all choices become spiritual decisions. You are not merely accessorizing, you are declaring allegiance. Beauty is not neutral, it is language. The objects you wear speak before you do. They tell a story about what you trust, what you serve, what you value. The wise choose their statements carefully, ensuring that every reflection of themselves aligns with the reflection of God's light. And so vigilance becomes routine. Before selecting a piece, ask, what is its history? What is its intent? Does it point to God or away from Him? Can it stand in the presence of prayer and worship without distraction? Can it honor faith while celebrating creation? Christians are called to holiness in all things, not merely in prayer or service. The integrity of the Spirit manifests in every habit, every object, every reflection. Jewelry, seemingly trivial, is a daily exercise in discernment, a test of alignment, a call to obedience. When attention is paid to these details, faith grows stronger. The simple act of choosing consciously what adorns your body strengthens mindfulness, reinforces spiritual authority, and builds habits that translate into every other area of life. The mind that discerns jewelry is trained to discern temptation. The hand that removes harmful objects is prepared to reject sin. And the heart that honors God through deliberate choice becomes more attuned to prayer, scripture, and spiritual growth. The mundane transforms into ministry, and the ordinary act of adornment becomes a measure of devotion. Through this awareness, even beauty itself becomes sanctified. Gold, silver, gems, intricate craftsmanship, these no longer distract or endanger. They become tools of reflection, reminders of God's creativity, symbols of the order and blessing inherent in His creation. Adornment transforms from potential hazard into opportunity for worship. The soul, strengthened through vigilance and intention, becomes a beacon, able to wear beauty without compromise, to celebrate craftsmanship without participation in shadow. As awareness deepens, you begin to see the subtler ways jewelry communicates beyond appearance. It is not simply an object, it is a vessel of energy, a mirror of intention, a silent conversation with the unseen. Every piece you wear carries a vibration, a memory, a resonance that either aligns with God or draws your attention elsewhere. Faith is strengthened not by ignorance, but by intentional selection, by conscious alignment of the physical and the spiritual. You realize that what adorns your body reflects what rules your spirit. You begin to examine history, origin, and intention before placing any object on your person. Stones that glimmer with beauty may have been collected in rituals unknown to you. Metals may have been shaped with symbols whose meaning has long been lost to the mundane eye, but retained in the spirit world. The most innocuous ring may carry echoes of oaths, curses, or energies from generations past. To wear it without discernment is to invite participation in intentions you cannot see and do not control. Awareness becomes protection. Knowledge becomes freedom. The transformation that begins with vigilance over jewelry ripples into life. Attention to these small but significant choices cultivates habits of discernment in speech, thought, and action. You learn to question before accepting, to pause before agreeing, to examine before following. The same discipline that protects your spirit from hidden influence strengthens prayer, deepens understanding of Scripture, and heightens sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. Faith becomes operational, visible in decisions both trivial and significant. Generosity becomes a principle of adornment as well. The jewelry you choose can symbolize stewardship and blessing rather than selfishness or status. When worn intentionally, a necklace, bracelet, or ring reminds you to live in service, to honor God's provision, and to reflect light rather than attract attention for the wrong reasons. Even aesthetic choices can become expressions of obedience, demonstrating that beauty is not separate from holiness but a conduit for it. You begin to recognize the dangers of attachment. When the soul becomes attached to objects, the heart slowly shifts allegiance. The more value you place on the adornment itself, the more power it gains over your spirit. Pride, vanity, and desire can grow silently under the guise of fashion or elegance. But when attachment is broken, when intention governs choice, beauty ceases to be a snare and becomes a celebration of creation. Faith is reinforced when the physical is harmonized with the spiritual. Every decision to remove, avoid, or refuse jewelry with questionable history strengthens spiritual resilience. Small acts of obedience teach the heart to trust God above sensation, wisdom above allure, principle above preference. Each avoided temptation reinforces the authority of the spirit over the senses. The body becomes a temple not through prohibition alone, but through conscious, repeated acts of stewardship that cultivate character and spiritual strength. The practical habits of discernment spill into other areas of life. Your relationships become more intentional, your speech more guarded, your generosity more consistent, and your prayer life more focused. What begins at the table of adornment becomes a discipline of the entire soul. Awareness transforms mundane choices into moral exercises. The jewelry you wear no longer rules you. It serves as a reminder of alignment with divine order. Faith becomes lived, embodied, visible in action and in appearance. You also begin to see the interplay of influence. Objects carry not only history, but energy from previous holders, environments, and intentions. Wearing items without understanding these influences leaves the spirit vulnerable. Even well-intentioned gifts can carry hidden energies, subtly shaping moods, thoughts, or priorities. Conscious selection, blessing, and stewardship are not superstitions. They are active measures of spiritual protection. Awareness of these forces empowers you to live intentionally rather than passively. Over time, the practice of discernment leads to a state of harmony. Jewelry no longer represents risk. It becomes a tool of reflection. Every choice signals allegiance to God, to holiness, to truth. Your aesthetic becomes an extension of faith, a testament to alignment, a living sermon for those who observe. Those around you sense the difference, not because of material value, but because spiritual presence is undeniable. The soul that chooses wisely in small matters radiates authority and peace in all matters. Fasting from vanity and temptation in adornment becomes a metaphor for broader spiritual discipline. Each conscious refusal trains the will. Each prayerful decision strengthens discernment. Each intentional choice aligns thought, action, and desire. The body, once passive, becomes a partner in faith. The mind, once distracted, becomes attuned to wisdom. The heart, once susceptible to allure, becomes fortified with vigilance. You begin to embody the principle that holiness is practiced in the ordinary, maintained in repetition, and lived in alignment. And then comes the subtle joy of liberation. The soul that once felt the tug of hidden influences now feels freedom. Adornment is no longer a chain but a canvas. Beauty is no longer a distraction but a mirror reflecting divine order. Every ring, bracelet, and necklace becomes a testament to mindfulness and devotion. Faith is strengthened not by fear of the world, but by mastery over personal choices. You realize that God's power is exercised through intentional living, and that obedience in small matters ensures victory in large ones. The culmination of this practice is the embodiment of divine rhythm. You move through the world not in anxiety or compulsion, but in grace and awareness. You see that what you wear communicates who you are and whose you are. You no longer adorn yourself for vanity, approval, or influence. You adorn yourself to honor God, to cultivate mindfulness, and to manifest presence. Each object becomes an instrument, each choice a note, each act a reflection of the sacred. Through consistent vigilance, your faith solidifies. The dangers of jewelry bearing hidden intent no longer threaten you. Awareness, discipline, prayer, and blessing create a protective rhythm. The habits of discernment spill into every corner of life, shaping character, cultivating resilience, and strengthening spiritual authority. Faith becomes inseparable from practice, and holiness manifests in everyday choices. And then you understand the ultimate truth. The ordinary can become extraordinary through intentionality. Jewelry, which could have weakened your faith, now reinforces it. Beauty, once a potential snare, now magnifies your devotion. Objects no longer dictate influence. They serve as reminders of alignment, obedience, and presence. You have turned temptation into testimony, distraction into discipline, and adornment into affirmation of faith. As this awareness deepens, you begin to perceive the subtle ways jewelry interacts with human intention and spiritual energy. Every ring, pendant, or bracelet carries a story, not just in its design, but in the symbolism and history embedded within it. Some stones, metals, or charms were once revered in rituals that sought influence beyond the natural. To wear them unknowingly is not merely aesthetic, it is participation. Faith is compromised when intention is not aligned with God, and every small choice becomes a test of vigilance. You begin to see that adornment, like all tools, is neutral only until it is engaged. The same piece of gold can glorify God or glorify vanity. A simple gemstone can be a reminder of creation or a conduit for influence opposed to divine order. Awareness allows you to reclaim authority. To discern, to bless, to choose deliberately is to remove the power of hidden histories and redirect their energy toward worship rather than compromise. The body, once passive, becomes a partner in faith, wearing not just beauty but obedience. The practice of examining the origins of your jewelry begins to strengthen other aspects of your life. The discipline cultivated in these seemingly minor choices extends into prayer, into relationships, into every decision you make. You learn that faith is not a compartmentalized virtue exercised only in church or devotion, but a continuous act expressed in every thought, action, and choice. What you wear becomes a symbol not of fashion, but of fidelity, not to men, but to God. Generosity and service become intertwined with adornment. Pieces of jewelry are no longer purchased merely for personal pleasure. They are chosen to honor God, to cultivate mindfulness, and to inspire gratitude. When you give, when you wear, when you display with intentionality, you begin to see that objects serve the heart rather than dictate it. Faith grows not in ignorance of influence, but in the mastery of it. You recognize that the smallest details of your daily life, what you allow to touch your body, reflect your allegiance and your discipline. Attachment becomes a measure of faithfulness. The more the soul becomes dependent on objects for identity, status, or security, the more it is distracted from God. The moment a piece of jewelry begins to command attention or influence your sense of self, it has stepped beyond ornament into idol. Awareness of this subtle shift becomes the first line of spiritual defense. You begin to practice detachment, consciously aligning your choice of adornment with divine intention rather than human desire. Through these practices, the energy surrounding you transforms. Jewelry is no longer a passive element. It becomes a symbol, a reminder, a tool for reflection. The table, the altar, the mirror, they are no longer neutral surfaces, but extensions of your disciplined attention. The choices you make regarding what you wear, what you display, and what you allow to influence your energy ripple into every facet of daily life. Faith is strengthened through repetition, vigilance, and conscious alignment. You notice also the influence on others. Family, friends, and community begin to respond to your intentionality. Your presence carries a steadiness and a clarity that speaks louder than words. Those who observe your choices recognize the rhythm of discipline, the energy of faith, the practice of obedience. Jewelry, once a medium of distraction or compromise, now becomes a conduit of inspiration. By aligning your external adornment with your internal devotion, you are teaching without preaching, guiding without words, shining without display. As mindfulness strengthens, joy emerges naturally. You no longer fear what you wear because your awareness shields the spirit. Beauty is no longer an anxiety or a distraction. It is a reflection of creation, a celebration of divine craftsmanship. The objects themselves do not command power. They simply echo the intentions you bring to them. Faith, once weakened by unexamined adornment, grows resilient, nourished by attention, discipline, and prayerful discernment. The rhythm of these choices becomes sacred. Choosing, blessing, wearing with awareness, these acts form a cadence that aligns body, mind, and spirit. Each conscious decision fortifies the soul. Each prayerful acknowledgement of God's provision strengthens vigilance. Each avoidance of potential harm cultivates resilience. Your life begins to resonate with intentionality, and the mundane act of wearing jewelry becomes a microcosm of broader spiritual alignment. You also see the practical blessings of such alignment. Discernment in adornment sharpens discernment in relationships. Awareness of influence strengthens wisdom in speech. Discipline in minor acts fortifies resistance to major temptations. The life of faith is cumulative. Small acts of obedience compound into spiritual authority, patience, and insight. Jewelry becomes both metaphor and method, training the soul in vigilance, reverence, and alignment. Eventually, the 7 habits that once weakened faith attachment, vanity, ignorance of origin, distraction, reliance on objects for security, indulgence, and forgetfulness, begin to reverse. Each act of intentionality reinforces vigilance. Each choice strengthens discernment. Each reflection fosters humility. The objects around you cease to dominate, becoming reminders rather than rulers. Beauty becomes sacred, adornment a testimony, and every interaction with material creation an exercise in stewardship. Faith solidifies in this rhythm. Prayer is more attentive, obedience more deliberate, discernment more acute. You discover that holiness is not only cultivated in extraordinary acts, but in the ordinary, repeated, conscious practices that demonstrate allegiance. Jewelry, once a source of potential compromise, now functions as a tool for alignment. The physical and spiritual are harmonized, and your choices reflect the authority of a soul that has reclaimed vigilance. Finally, you understand a profound truth. The smallest acts of awareness carry enormous spiritual weight. The decision to remove, to refuse, to bless, to discern, or to avoid carries more impact than fleeting indulgence. Faith is strengthened not in dramatic moments alone, but in the countless choices made with intention, reflection, and obedience. Jewelry, though small, becomes a daily test of allegiance, a constant exercise of discernment, and an opportunity for sanctification. You see now that protection, discipline, and alignment in the ordinary prepare the soul for extraordinary challenges. The vigilance cultivated through these practices translates into resilience, wisdom, and spiritual clarity in every aspect of life. Faith is not weakened by the presence of beauty or adornment, but by unconscious engagement with influences beyond God's authority. By exercising discernment, you reclaim authority over the self, the environment, and the spirit, allowing holiness to permeate every interaction, decision, and reflection. And as this awareness becomes routine, you notice a subtle but powerful shift within yourself. The act of choosing carefully what adorns your body begins to cultivate intentionality in every area of life. Your words, once careless or reactive, become measured and deliberate. Your decisions, once driven by impulse or desire for approval, become grounded in principle. You begin to see that the discipline exercised in these small acts, removing, refusing, blessing, discerning ripples outward, transforming the broader rhythms of existence. What once was mundane now carries weight, and the ordinary becomes extraordinary through vigilance and faith. You begin to sense the invisible connections that exist between all things. The jewelry you wear, the objects you display, the choices you make, they are not isolated. Every act of awareness aligns with divine order, while every act of negligence leaves the soul exposed. You realize that your body is a temple, and every object it touches can either strengthen that temple or weaken it. Conscious engagement with your surroundings becomes a form of spiritual fortification. You see that God has provided not only commandments, but also patterns of wisdom embedded in the ordinary details of life. The deeper lesson is subtle but transformative. Faith thrives in attentiveness. By examining the history, symbolism, and energy of each piece of jewelry, you practice vigilance that extends into prayer, study, and action. You become adept at discerning influence, recognizing temptation, and rejecting distractions that seek to divert attention from God. The mind that learns to see hidden intentions in objects becomes skilled at perceiving hidden truths in situations and relationships. The heart that resists the pull of vanity and enchantment becomes strengthened against the subtler lures of the world. You also discover the power of intentional blessing. Before wearing a piece of jewelry, you pray, consecrate, and dedicate it to God's purposes. In doing so, you transform potential channels of influence into instruments of grace. The object itself remains inert. It is your awareness, your blessing, and your intention that aligns it with divine energy. Through this practice, you reclaim authority, demonstrating that holiness is not merely a matter of avoidance, but of active engagement. Faith grows stronger, not in fear of objects, but in conscious stewardship of them. Gradually, the habits of discernment become second nature. You no longer rely on fear or superstition to guide your choices. You rely on knowledge, prayer, and alignment with God's principles. Every decision regarding adornment reflects a deeper understanding of obedience and reverence. The temptation to indulge in vanity diminishes, replaced by a joy rooted in integrity. What was once a test becomes a habit, and what was once a challenge becomes an opportunity for worship. Through consistent practice, the 7 habits that once weakened faith attachment, vanity, ignorance of origin, distraction, reliance on objects, indulgence, and forgetfulness are reversed. Conscious selection reinforces vigilance, blessing strengthens intentionality, and mindfulness cultivates spiritual resilience. The physical and spiritual aspects of life become intertwined, harmonized through deliberate acts that honor God. Each choice at the table of adornment strengthens not only faith but also character, awareness, and discernment. The influence of this transformation extends beyond the individual. Friends, family, and community begin to sense the difference. The energy you carry radiates peace and stability. The deliberate choices you make inspire mindfulness, reverence, and intentional living in those around you. Even silence becomes meaningful, imbued with the authority of a life aligned with God. Faith is no longer confined to prayer or ritual. It manifests in the subtle expressions of daily life, including the seemingly simple act of wearing jewelry. As your awareness matures, joy emerges naturally from obedience. The satisfaction of knowing that every choice honors God surpasses the fleeting pleasure of adornment chosen without discernment. Beauty, once a potential distraction, becomes a reflection of creation and a symbol of alignment. You experience freedom from influence, clarity of purpose, and strength of character. The mind is sharpened, the spirit fortified, and the soul elevated. Each day becomes an exercise in intentionality, with small acts of vigilance compounding into profound spiritual growth. You also recognize that the discipline cultivated in this sphere strengthens your broader faith. The awareness, restraint, and discernment learned through careful selection of adornment translate into resilience in other areas. Resisting temptation, practicing humility, exercising patience, and nurturing integrity, your faith becomes operational, expressed in choices large and small, mundane and extraordinary. The body becomes a partner in spiritual formation, and the mind a tool for obedience rather than distraction. Finally, you understand that holiness is not confined to dramatic acts of devotion, but is embedded in every decision, every reflection, and every action. The jewelry you wear, once a potential channel of influence, becomes a means of aligning your external life with your internal devotion. Beauty, adornment, and intentionality merge, creating a holistic expression of faith that permeates thought, speech, and action. Discipline in one domain strengthens character in all domains, producing a life that is harmonious, resilient, and reflective of divine order. At last the moment arrives when discernment becomes instinct, when vigilance becomes joy, when faith asserts itself not through struggle but through alignment. You stand before mirrors, before doors, before the world itself, and you see that the beauty surrounding you no longer tempts but teaches. The objects you once handled with caution now serve as symbols of your authority over influence, reminders that obedience begins in small acts, in choices that may seem minor but carry immense spiritual weight. Each decision about adornment resonates far beyond its appearance. It echoes in the mind, reverberates in the heart, and anchors the soul in steadfast faith. You realize now that the small acts of refusal, of blessing, of awareness, are cumulative. Every careful choice compounds the strength of your spirit. Jewelry that once could have been a conduit of distraction or deception has been transformed into a canvas of integrity. What you wear now declares allegiance not to trends or fortune or vanity, but to holiness, reverence, and divine wisdom. Your body, once passive, is now a temple, your hands instruments of intention, your reflection a testament to alignment with God's light. The freedom is subtle, yet profound. You no longer fear influence because you have learned authority. The allure of vanity no longer captivates because your heart is anchored in truth. The whispers of distraction and temptation fade into background noise as your spirit hums in resonance with divine order. You are not bound by objects, symbols, or histories, because you have reclaimed sovereignty over your own attention, your own habits, and your own allegiance. Faith is no longer weakened by the material. It is strengthened through the mastery of conscious choice. And then the clarity strikes with piercing power. Holiness is woven through the ordinary, the mundane, the everyday. It is present not only in prayer, in worship, in scripture, but in meals, in gestures, in adornment, in the attention given to the smallest acts. Each ring placed with discernment, each pendant chosen with prayer, each bracelet worn with awareness becomes an exercise in sanctity. These seemingly trivial acts are no longer trivial. They are the practice ground for the eternal, the rehearsal for heaven, the daily training of a soul in alignment with God. As your life continues in this rhythm, the transformation extends beyond your own spirit. Family, friends, and community sense the difference. They do not merely observe a change in appearance, they feel a change in presence. Conversations deepen, atmosphere shifts, tensions dissolve, and the environment itself becomes fertile ground for blessing. You realize that intentional living, beginning in small acts of awareness and discernment, radiates outward, influencing hearts and shaping the world around you. Holiness is contagious, faith is infectious, and grace becomes audible even in silence. The spiritual discipline of adornment also becomes a lens through which all other choices are clarified. The discernment exercised in jewelry guides decisions in relationships, speech, finances, and time. The mind that recognizes subtle influence in the material world can discern deception, temptation, and distraction in every sphere. The heart that exercises restraint in these acts gains patience, endurance, and wisdom. Faith, previously theoretical, becomes operational, expressed not only in words, but in the totality of living. And now the joy emerges, a deep, radiant joy, unshakable and serene. It is born of freedom from unseen influence, of alignment with God's intention, of mastery over distraction, of vigilance exercised with love rather than fear. You see that beauty, when approached with reverence, becomes a vehicle for gratitude, a reflection of divine craftsmanship, a reminder of creation itself. Pleasure no longer threatens holiness, it magnifies it. The soul, strengthened through consistent awareness, experiences a profound peace that surpasses understanding. You realize that the very challenge that once threatened faith has now become the greatest teacher. The objects that could have weakened your spirit have become instruments of growth, resilience, and wisdom. You understand that temptation is never simply something to avoid, but an opportunity to practice obedience, to cultivate vigilance, to refine discernment. Faith is fortified in these moments, strengthened not by fear of loss, but by deliberate, consistent alignment with truth. As this consciousness matures, the symbolism of adornment extends into every act of life. You understand that stewardship, intentionality, and discernment are principles that govern not only objects, but actions, thoughts, words, and relationships. Each day, choices large and small are opportunities to demonstrate allegiance to God rather than distraction by the world. Holiness is no longer a distant aspiration. It is a living practice, embedded in every movement, every decision, every reflection. And in this living practice, you discover liberation. The anxiety of unseen influence dissipates, replaced by clarity and confidence. Vanity no longer exerts control because your worth is measured in obedience, not appearance. Pleasure no longer distracts because your attention is anchored in purpose. Every object, every habit, every detail of your day is now an opportunity to honor God and to strengthen faith. You move through the world with awareness, vigilance, and joy, a living testimony to the power of intentionality. At the culmination of this journey, the spiritual mastery becomes evident. You can wear beauty without compromise, enjoy adornment without distraction, and navigate the material world without succumbing to unseen influence. Jewelry, once a potential channel of harm, now serves as a daily exercise in stewardship, obedience, and reverence. You are free, yet disciplined, aware, yet joyful, adorned, yet anchored in faith. The ordinary act of choosing what to wear becomes a constant, living practice of holiness. Finally, you understand the ultimate principle. Faith is cultivated not in extraordinary acts alone, but in the small, intentional, repeated choices that shape the soul over time. Jewelry is only one manifestation of these choices. Every word spoken, every act performed, every decision made can either strengthen or weaken faith. The ordinary becomes sacred when approached with reverence, discipline, and alignment. You see that God's call is not to fear the world's beauty, but to navigate it with discernment, wisdom, and conscious obedience. And so, as you stand each day before mirrors, before doors, before the world itself, you carry with you the profound freedom of vigilance, the radiant joy of alignment, the peace of mastery, and the authority of a disciplined spirit. You no longer wear adornment as a mere object. You wear intention, awareness, and faith. Every reflection, every glance, every gesture becomes an opportunity to live in alignment with God, to honor creation, to exercise discernment, and to amplify holiness. Your life itself becomes the testimony. Ordinary choices, made intentionally, can transform the soul, fortify faith, and manifest God's light in the world. And in this final awakening, you know with unwavering certainty that the smallest acts matter, the ordinary is sacred, and the faithful are never powerless. Each decision you make is a note in the eternal symphony, a reflection of divine order, a declaration of allegiance to God. The jewelry you wear, the objects you touch, the choices you make, they all become instruments of alignment, reminders that holiness is cultivated in the ordinary, practiced in vigilance, and manifested through intentionality. And thus, faith is no longer fragile, but fortified, radiant, and alive, echoing in every aspect of your existence, visible, tangible, and unstoppable.